I'm Brady and Essential here with BNN 10, bringing you a special Throwback Thursday episode of our show. Today we're going to be kicking it back to the late 19th century and taking a look at the scramble for Africa. This time period is often referred to as New Imperialism, as it was the second wave of European territorial expansion around the world. While many areas felt the effects of this second wave of imperialism, none felt it harder than Africa. Before the 1800s, the only European colonies in Africa were along the coast. This was in large part due to disease, with malaria being the chief cause of death for European settlers. Malaria is a mosquito-borne disease caused by parasitic infection that is very prevalent in equatorial regions. The fear of this disease was so great among Europeans that, in 1874, the British couldn't find a governor for their colony on the Gold Coast, as many declined due to a fear of the illness. Overcoming this disease was the largest challenge to African colonial efforts by Europeans. The rate of mortality for British troops in Africa was between 46 and 72%. That compares to as little as 1.5% of soldiers in Britain. That all changed when the quina tree was discovered in South America, a tree whose bark contained the compound quinine, an anti-malarial preventative medicine that greatly reduced the effects of this disease. Fast forward over 20 years later, quinine was first synthesized in a lab by French scientists Pierre Pelletier and Joseph Caventou, making this remedy widely available and affordable for Europeans, often in the form of tonic water. The famous medical missionary Dr. David Livingstone was one of the first explorers to utilize quinine on his explorations in Africa, where he demonstrated the effectiveness of the drug against malaria. Livingstone would go on to have his supply of quinine stolen, calling the instance a, quote, death sentence. Weeks later, he died of the disease. After it was popularized among European troops, the mortality rate due to disease dropped to 1.7% within Africa. This medical miracle made it possible for Europeans to survive the harsh realities of living in Africa and open up the region to further territorial expansion. Now that the malarial boundary had been lifted from the continent, Europeans were free to roam about Africa and take whatever land they wanted. Right? Wrong. Europeans still suffered from an inability to navigate the continent, as their horses continued to die from sleeping sickness and their ships were unable to navigate the shallow waters of inland Africa. This is where the development of steamships comes into play. Steamships were still an experimental technology during the early stages of colonialism, but Robert Fulton's innovation of a commercially viable steamship changed the face of navigating the continent forever. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Ben Zink.
Thanks, Brady. Steamships were a huge boost to the European colonial efforts in Africa. While Robert Fulton was key in developing the technology, it was another man that really put it to good use. Meet MacGregor Laird. MacGregor was the son of a wealthy shipbuilder and gunmaker who began to utilize iron to create sturdier and more buoyant ships. He then took this new technique and combined it with Fulton's steamship concept to give the world its very first steamboat. This new combination of technology allowed the vessel to be faster, stronger, and more buoyant than its wooden counterparts, allowing it to consistently withstand the stresses of navigating the oceans and inland rivers. MacGregor then put this technology to good use after founding the African Inland Commercial Company, along with several other businessmen from Liverpool, taking 2 steamships to go explore the Niger River. After a successful transatlantic passage, the boats navigated up the Niger River for well over 200 miles all the way to the river's confluence with the Benue. Unfortunately for this expedition, the synthesis of quinine was still in the process and 75% of the crew perished due to malaria. Despite the tragic cost of such an expedition, it proved to Europeans that steamships were here to stay. Back to you, Brady.
10-second trivia. What was the effective range of a 19th century musket? 100 feet, 300 feet, 500 feet, or 1,000 feet? The effective range of a 19th century musket was close to 300 feet, or about the length of a football field. Our final story today concerns the advancements in weapons technology that allowed Europe to expand their territory through warfare. At the turn of the century, muskets were the dominant weapons on the battlefield, often being more effective as a pike with a bayonet than as a true firearm. This was for 2 reasons. The weapons took far too long to load, and they were incredibly inaccurate when at a significant distance. This resulted in a military force that had a low rate of fire and a still lower chance of hitting their mark. The latter of these 2 problems was resolved by a key innovation to infantry guns: rifling. A spiral pattern within the barrel of these weapons allowed the bullet to spin on its axis, doubling the effective range of these weapons. The second key innovation for infantry rifles was the breech loading mechanism. Allowing a soldier to access the base of his barrel would allow him to save a great deal of time when loading the weapon, allowing the regiment as a whole to send more bullets flying into the enemy ranks. While this improved accuracy and faster loading time greatly improved the capability of these troops, these innovations would pale in comparison to that of the automatic rifle. Inventor Hiram Maxim set out to produce a gun with an automatic action according to his 1885 patent, and he did just that. The Maxim machine gun was the world's first truly automatic rifle, and it had a devastating effect on the battlefield. Take, for example, the British encounter with the Dervish people of Sudan. A small force of British soldiers armed with 20 Maxim machine guns were able to massacre over 11,000 Dervish warriors in just a few hours. The Maxim machine gun turned these once challenging and tedious conflicts into a one-sided affair where Europe trounced over countless numbers of native people. Quinine? More like wynine, because that stuff will make you cry-nine. You really gotta try it if you're in the African area, because if you don't, you will surely die of malaria. Tastes so bad that it'll make you vomit, and that's why the British mix the gin and the tonic. Yeah, I mix it up like I'm a red coat, but they only make it in Africa with a steamboat. If I keep this up, Carl's career is done. Automatic Versage is like a machine gun. This week we are shouting out Northwest High School for being the most likely to drop a Carl Azuz diss track. You guys are awesome. That wraps it up for this week's episode. Tune in for our next episode when we get assigned a project about the causes of World War I. Until then, I'm Brady Anacensel for BNN. Hi, I'm Brady Anacensel here with BNN 10, bringing you that's not Carl, but Robert Fulton's innovation of a commercially viable steam shape. Quinine? More like crynine. Ooh.
Thanks, Brady.
A small force of dervish... I was so close. Sometimes you just...